everyone, I'm Bridget Volk, and this is my case study of the Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center. We're going to talk about Paul Levy and his first 6 months as CEO at the BIDMC. So November and December. These were important months. Paul met with a search coordinator. He talked about receiving the Hunter report, and he wanted to establish a foundation and framework within which it would be received. He didn't necessarily want to blame all the problems on the consulting firm after receiving the Hunter report. In fact, he requested to be in the job on the first week of January in order to properly deal with it. He talked about the board being too big. He talked about a few things. He did ultimately accept the position. The search committee unanimously decided to hire Levy. He then met with the Attorney General, who he had a relationship with. He met with the Attorney General and their assistant and talked about what would happen if the BID was sold to a for-profit organization. And one of the main things that was a concern was losing that Harvard affiliation. So the doctors would no longer be Harvard doctors at that point. So that was problematic to Paul. January 7th was his first day on the job. One of his strong suits was was speaking to the press, and the Boston Herald published an article talking about a possible 500 to 700 layoffs. And Levy did meet with the Globe, and something he mentioned that was important was quality of care in the face of layoffs. So he sent out an introductory email to all of his employees, and he did respond to the press promptly. So the Hunter report was released on January 10th. It reported a loss of $67 million for the hospital, and some of the things that were noted was that radiation, ambulatory surgery, and pulmonary needed to make more money. It was important to maintain obstetrics, but what Paul did is he made it available to all of the employees. Something that he claimed is that he wanted to maintain honesty, openness, and inclusiveness with all of his employees. It was also noted that the care group structure was problematic. There was no CEO at this point in time, and the Herald referred to it actually as a chain of weakening links. So there was a commitment to a strategic plan, which included financial targets, broad financial measures, and milestones to be held accountable for. All right. So lifting people's spirits, that was happening in the beginning of February. Something that I like that was mentioned in the case study was how, the Patriots had recently won the Super Bowl, and everyone was saying, if the Patriots can do it, we can do it too. So he sent out a general email to the staff explaining that he had hope for the future. On February 7th, he wrote an introductory letter to the strategic plan, which included principles and vision, and talks about retaining and maintaining a reputation as a warm, caring environment, as Boston is a highly competitive market for hospitals. So it was important to maintain their role as an academic medical network, and to talk about what the plan will be. Levy claimed that the Hunter report was objectively sound, it was a good job, there were a few amendments, and it was a good analysis of why previous plans had failed. So Levy talked about getting to know the staff. He gave them a lot of reassurance, which I think was one of his strong suits. And this is where a little bit of drama with the chiefs ensued. The chief of service specifically expressed objections to why he wasn't on any of the committees. He claimed that chiefs are never consulted, although they usually were. Levy believed that they were too high up to be a good decision-making body, and that they would be consulted at the appropriate time. He got a little bit angry with the chief of service, who was whining about not being included. But what he did do is send an email back explaining why the chiefs need not be included at this point in time. March was the announcement of the task force. It was important to develop them. There were 5 steering committees appointed for the task forces. They had to do with how we bill and collect for funds for patient care, how we determine what supplies and equipment are best used to care for patients, and how we get those at the best possible price, what is the best way to organize and deliver and bill for our outpatient services, and how to increase the number of patients visiting our hospital, and finally, how to determine the appropriate scope and scale of our academic programs. So there was something called a kitchen cabinet of major department heads, which included medicine, surgery, obstetrics, radiology, and pathology, and problem was that they tended to not agree with each other, so that'll get brought up again later. There was consideration of acquiring Glover Hospital in Needham and a few other future strategic initiatives, which included possibly Emmanuel College leasing out some of the buildings. And at the end of March, March 25th, the chiefs, as managers, were were encouraged actually to explain budget variances, and Paul found their answers to be unsatisfactory. What he said is most of the explanations are not sufficient to permit the board to have a good understanding of what has driven volumes to be above or below the estimates we have in the budget. And he said that our credibility as an organization will be judged by our ability to explain what is happening here. So he took the reins really and communicated to the chiefs why they need to do a little bit better of a job explaining the budget variances. In addition to this, he got a request from the care group CFO who wanted to sell the hospital to a capital partner. But on a good note, the hospital presidents began to cooperate with one another. So that brings us to April with mention of the dissolution of the care group. And there was a lot of talk about this. Their market position had been eroded a little bit. The bondholders would certainly be affected by the dissolution, and they must be taken care of as they ultimately do rule. In addition to this, going on at the same point in time was assessment of the COO. There was a proposed plan to dissolve the care group. It was talked about how to approach bondholders. There was no hurry to meet with them. It was important to work out the details before meeting with them and perhaps bring in a professional negotiator. As a corporate governing structure, the care group would dissolve by October 1st, 2002 anyway. So in addition to this, there was communication with the COO and CFO, who Levy was a little bit disappointed with at this point in time and considering letting go or getting rid of anyway. So that brings us to May. There was a reduction in the size of the BOD. There was a first meeting of the smaller BOD. Notes from the meeting include that they need a new COO, a new chief of orthopedics, a clear statement of programmatic priorities that will enhance financial capabilities in real estate, and he was pleased with other personnel matters. And Levy talked about the loss of care group as being ambivalent at this point in time. Shortly following that, the COO was fired and the chief of orthopedics was asked to step down. The BID was trimming their losses essentially at this point. There was presidents negotiated an agreement required for dissolution of the care group to proceed. Board members were interfering on developmental issues. Paul did send them an email back discussing this. And there was another round of variance explanations by the chiefs at this point in time. June and July, performance goals were set for the chiefs, so there's more care and concern for the chiefs and communication with them happening all along on Levy's part. In addition to this, BIDMC acquired Glover Hospital in Needham. There was capacity planning. Bond insurers were still freaking out a little bit about the care group dissolution plan. And Levy was addressing nursing issues. And there was an email Levy sent out about receiving letters every week in which a patient or a family member or a member of our physician staff or a referring physician set forth a touching and thoughtful story of the difference made an individual in the OR, the ICU, or the floor had made. He said that in particular, the nursing practice at the BIDMC has long been the hallmark of our success and reputation for excellent patient care. So it was noted that that was one of their strong suits, and that was to be continued to happen. In July, the concept of research was identified as still being very important, as it is an academic institution. There was a new COO elected, and this was Paul's 6 months as the CEO. At this point in time, financial results were being better than budgeted for. There had been 2 profitable months, and there was more talk about setting performance objectives for the chiefs. But at this point, Levy encouraged people to not focus on specifically financials, but focus on, more of a qualitative approach to how the hospital was doing at this point in time. But that concludes the case study, and we're going to move on to class materials that tie it all together. All right, so I chose to look at the Rainey text, both chapters 13 and 14. We'll start with 13, which has to do with managing organizational change and development. It talked about how change can happen purposely or spontaneously, naturally. I think at this point, for this case study, there was a lot of purposeful change that was happening. Levy came in with a purpose, starting out with the Hunter report. He purposely postured himself to be in a place where he could deal with the report and move on. And I think his posture all along was very purposeful in the sense that he was communicating with people, he had clear goals in mind, and he had clear plans to reach those goals. Charisma is also mentioned, which we'll get to in a few slides. It talked about bureaus and how they have a 3-stage life, including struggle for autonomy, rapid expansion, and deceleration. The struggle for autonomy kind of was happening with each department of the hospital. The rapid expansion is more what Levy focused on and how to make each department as efficient as possible, whether it's layoffs or whether it's cutting costs where they need to be. And eventually the departments would settle off and decelerate to a point of stasis. Lyndon brought up the concept of innovation and how an innovative manager can make an organization more effective, and there were 7 characteristics outlined, which had to do with strategic action, holding on and letting go, creating a felt need for change, starting with concrete change, using structural changes, dealing with risk, and using political skills. Political skills were used in dealing with the Attorney General. Levy dealt with risk all along. He created a felt need for change, arguably, and he started with concrete change. So I think he really encompassed the 7 characteristics outlined by Lyndon. Quinn and Cameron discussed the 4 stages of an organizational lifestyle, which includes entrepreneurial, collectivity, formalization and control, and elaboration, which Levy did a really good job of encompassing all of that as well for a large-scale plan change. And he was successful in the revitalization of the public agency that he was working for. So that moves us on to Chapter 14, Advancing Effective Management in the Public Sector. It talked a lot about the performance of public organizations. Efficiency and productivity were performance criteria. Peters and Waterman talked about in search of excellence, how there's productivity through people and you can achieve extraordinary results with ordinary people. I think Levy did a really good job of this. Basically, his communication of his expectations. In my experience and in general life experience, uncommunicated expectations often lead to disappointment and resentment. So I think Levy's ability to communicate with his employees really created an atmosphere of success. There's an emphasis on autonomy and teamwork, discussed by Peters and Waterman. Some of this includes a bias for action, staying close to the customer, which was done through emphasis on the nursing department, valuing autonomy and entrepreneurship, enhancing productivity through people, a hands-on, value-driven approach, sticking to the knitting, a simple form and lean staff, and simultaneous loose and tight properties. So in addition to this, total quality management was mentioned. It's a general movement or philosophy of management, and there are 14 tenets. I'm just going to go over some of the aspects of this that Levy encompassed. Statement of company aims for all employees to see, often published, which is what he did with the Hunter Report and what he did with a lot of other information, including the task force. He made everything available to the employees. He had everyone in the company learn and adopt a new philosophy. He was constantly improving the production system, teaching, training, leadership skills to encourage self-improvement, climate of innovation. He used teams to pursue optimal achievement of company goals in the task forces. He eliminated numerical production quotas, which he talked about at the end of the case study, where he encouraged people to look at the qualitative aspects of the hospital, and he removed barriers to pride of workmanship. All right, so the Shine article of 2004 talked more a little bit about charisma. It talked about how leaders get their message across through charisma. Leaders who have it are rare, and their impact is often hard to predict. And leaders embed the assumptions that they hold and thereby create the conditions for culture formation through charisma. And there were 6 primary embedding mechanisms mentioned. It had to do with what leaders pay attention to, measure, and control on a regular basis, how leaders react to critical incidents and organizational crises. Arguably, the whole thing was an organizational crisis. How leaders allocate resources, deliberate role modeling, teaching, and coaching, how leaders allocate rewards and status, and how leaders recruit, select, and promote, and excommunicate. And the excommunication part happened specifically with the COO and the CFO and the head of obstetrics, I believe it was. And he did a good job of having an open line of communication with them all along, and then when they needed to go, they were let go, and it wasn't a big deal, and it was more seamless than it could have been otherwise. All right, so Levy, we talked about how he's charismatic. I think his charisma really corralled the entire hospital in order to want to do better. He was a team player. He really included everyone. Even when the chiefs were having a hard time, he made it a point to include them. He encompasses the 6 primary embedding mechanisms we just discussed. He was very innovative in his approach. He had a lot of really good experience that led him to be in the position that he was in. and nonetheless he was successful at what he did. So I think there isn't a lot that I would say that he did wrong. I think Levy had a really good approach and a really positive attitude, and he postured himself all along for the greater good of the hospital. So that concludes my case study, and thank you for listening.